Okay. Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Bushwhacking History in Buffalo with Berserker Bear. So let's just get right into it. Today we're going to be pulling from a couple of my books. One you see on screen, and the other one is this one right here: Economic Principles, Problems and Policies. Excuse me. And this one, Gotham: A History of New York. Why are we using these two books? Well, I'm going to try to explain the whole orphan narrative, at least from the alternative history point of view, from our point of view, and how we look at things. Orphans and the Orphan-Trains. Okay, I'm going to be pulling from, as you can see, Wikipedia, but I also like to use Infogalactic. They're both very similar, in my opinion. Infogalactic's a little bit more tight with their lack of censorship. So there you go. All the links that I'm going to be using will be in the description. So yes, we're going to go over orphans, general, mainstream definition, as I normally do. We're going to briefly use this list of orphans and foundlings. We're going to have this page open, Industrial Revolution, for those who might just be listening. You got the Wikipedia page for Industrial Revolution. You also have I'm presenting the Infogalactic, because the excerpt that I'm going to be focused on, or at least come back to, is the child labor portion of the Industrial Revolution Wikipedia /Infogalactic. And we're also going to have the portion of child labor to refer to as well. History of child labor. Again, this is going to be a general overview of what's going on with the Orphan-Trains, and is it indicative or a fingerprint of what some call a reset in the early 1800s, maybe of a mudflood or an apocalyptic type of melting event. Now, let's take a step back in a 100,000-foot view as to what we're going to extrapolate here and what my aim and ambition is effectively. Hopefully it's not going to be a long one, though I get a little bit long in the tooth. Like I just said, are orphans indicative of a recent reset event that some say happened early in the 1800s, whether it be from a global inundation or realm-wide inundation of mud, which I don't agree happened, or is it from a plasmatic type of cataclysmic event that left a bunch of orphans? I don't subscribe to that, and I think the presentation that I put forth in this episode is not going to try to refute or go against, in a combative sense, those who propose that notion. Just offering other ideas historically and society-wise, that may offer other explanations. Such, for example, we're going to take some other. This is just the intro, so stick with me. This is what the video or episode will be about. We're also going to pull from things such as, my mother, there randomly, she has an idea that I have a YouTube page and channel, and I do research on Buffalo, but she doesn't really know like the niche and alternative history subjects, like for example, like I just said, mudflood or Orphan-Trains. And she's recently told me that she's reading this book called The Baby Thief by Barbara Byzance Raymond. And we're going to go over this because briefly, what it's about is 100% linked to orphans, possibly Orphan-Trains, or, like I just cited, these societal woes that happen with civilization constantly falling and rising. And is it just a endemic fingerprint or a systemic issue, unfortunately, of fallen men and the societies that they create, and quote-unquote civilization? Is our orphans a historical theme of fallen civilization? And another trope I want to explain on that level, oh boy, Sorry, going back and forth here. Anyway, let's get stick on track. The Baby Thief is a book that my mother is currently reading. Just happenstance. Like I said, she's not really privy to all the ins and outs of exactly all the alternative history research that I do and that this community does. So she's reading this book, and it's rather morbid. And this video that you're seeing on screen from YouTube, I'll put a link to it. It actually details a little bit more in depth, in an episode wise, what happens in the book, what happened in real life about pretty much a trafficker of orphans back in the early days, early 1900s. So that's that. We'll do that. And there's a couple of my videos that actually are relevant here as well. We're going to cycle around to that I probably wouldn't say having to watch before this one because you're already watching this, but one of them being my episode on planned obsolescence from, about a year ago. Wow, over a year ago. YouTube dates their episodes wrong. Or not wrong, but in a weird way. But anyway, that's not important how YouTube dates their videos. But it was about a year and a half ago when I put this out. Check that out. It details exactly what the definition of planned obsolescence is. And this is the actual video on YouTube. It's called Bushwhacking Planned Obsolescence versus the Age of Progress. I use another one of my books that I was given in the batch from Malachi Crunch. Shout out, buddy. But I quote, or I don't quote, but I show a clip of the movie that you see, Hudsucker Proxy. That's a good Coen Brothers joint with good old Andy Dufresne, a.k.a. Tim Robbins. Great actor. That's a great movie. And I define exactly what planned obsolescence is and the age of progress and show how it's kind of a little bit counterintuitive. So check that out. And there's another one. Of course, Bushwhacking the Basilica and Father Baker's Orphans. Trope here in Buffalo and Western New York. Everybody born prior to 1980, 84, 85, I'd say, maybe 86. If you were growing up here in Western New York, if you were bad, you were told you were going to get sent to Father Baker's. I explained that kind of weird, unique aspect about Buffalo and the greater Niagara region in this episode. I also put forth some other anomalies, not necessarily, it's back when my video or my channel was called Bushwhacking Tartaria. So keep that in mind. I may be using the T word a lot in these ones, but it still stands to reason. It shows the progression of how my point of view and my arc of my research. So that's why I keep these episodes up. So, okay, let's round about, and we'll end on a clip from this guy talking about the Great Reset and how within 100 years, how the Industrial Revolution, or the tail end of it, really changed our society from agrarian to hyper-industrialized to now tech-wise. And I've talked about this before with a video with Philip Druzin. And so we're also going to read from that article. So again, there's a Ranker article here about weird history. And this specific one says there were so many homeless orphans in the 1800s, they were auctioned off to the highest bidder. This is a little bit of a touchy subject, but I think it's more than worth looking into, because again, what I'm going to show are the cultural and societal aspects that would lead to having such a high orphan rate, or so many orphans back in the day. Was it indicative of a reset like this alternative history community, some might say, global mudflood or plasma event? In my opinion, I don't think it was that. So I'm going to show and pull out from the mainstream, also from my books, my angle, my point of view. And you can sleuth along with me because I'll put the links in the description. So let's go. We're going to read that article, and we'll work our way through the tabs that I have open, and that will be an episode. So again, we'll track back to this book will be at the end. It's got a very good detail on scarcity. In scarce cities, in my opinion, I think that scarcity is only a thing in major metropolitan cities. I think that the firmament is bountiful, and I've explained that before in former videos. So, all right, we're going to pull from this book as well because it's got a lot of orphan gravy in it. This is the index that cites all the different orphan stuff. So all the pages that you see that are marked with a pen on each side, like 503, 775, 780, yada yada. Each of those pages has orphan, the term orphan on it. I read through it. This is a huge book. I do use it for reference. Haven't read it through yet. My father has read it though. But as with a lot of my academic books, I use for reference. That said, each and every orphan term, I went through it and read the before and after context, and we're going to show it. So that's a good book to use also. Shout out to Tartarian Truth. We're going to get that video out about New Amsterdam pretty soon, I promise. Sorry about all the back and forth, man, but I appreciate it. This is another example of a side note right here. This struck my eye, New Amsterdam. Buffalo was also called New Amsterdam back in the day, and I've noticed that the harbors look similar because there's other Buffalo cityscapes that look exactly like this one, and this is New York City, obviously 1650. So is that something that should be sleuthed a little bit more? Yes, I believe so, and I think Tartarian Truth and I are going to do that. So keep a heads up for that down the road. Okay, yeah, there you go. Yeah, very similar to Buffalo Harbor. Very similar to the southern tip of Buffalo. This looks these panoramic low angle shots, and I've discussed that before briefly, but I've said it before. So much work to do. Okay, that book, and let's define orphan right quick and get right into it. So again, please hit like, share, and subscribe. We're bushwhacking orphans right now, and I appreciate coming back. Everybody, feedback and all the love I get in the comments, I see you, and we're going to keep on doing this. Slow and steady, like the a Logos locomotive. Let's go. Info Galactic here. Let's define an orphan. Orphan is a child whose parents are dead or have abandoned them permanently. In common usage, only a child who has lost both parents is called an orphan. When referring to animals, only the mother's condition is usually relevant. If she has gone, the offspring is an orphan, regardless of the father's condition. Adults can also be referred to as orphan or adult orphans. However, survivors who reached adulthood before their parents died are normally not called orphans. It is a term generally reserved for children whose parents have died while they are too young to support themselves. We're also going to get into, let's close out the Wikipedia. Let's define Orphan-Train, okay, out of Info Galactic. The Orphan-Train movement was a supervised welfare program that transported children from crowded eastern cities of the United States to foster homes located largely in rural areas of the Midwest. The Orphan-Trains operated between 1854 and 1829, relocating about 250,000 children. The co-founders of the Orphan-Train movement claimed that these children were orphaned, abandoned, abused, or homeless. But this was not always true. They were mostly the children of new immigrants and the children of the poor and destitute families living in these cities. Criticisms include ineffective screenings of caretakers, insufficient follow-ups on placements, and that many children were used as strictly slave farm labor. 3 charitable institutions, Children's Village, founded 1851 by 24 philanthropists, the Children's Aid Society, established 1853 by Charles Loring Brace, and later the New York Foundling Hospital endeavored to help these children. The institutions were supported by wealthy donors and operated by professional staff. The 3 institutions developed a program that placed homeless, orphaned, and abandoned city children who numbered an estimated 30,000 in New York City alone in the 1850s. We're going to use that book to corroborate that, okay? in New York City alone in the 1850s in foster homes throughout the country. The children were transported to their new homes on trains that were labeled orphan trains or baby trains. This relocation of children ended in the 1930s due to decreased need for farm labor in the Midwest. Okay, so let me underline and give context here of what the alternative history, we're going to read this article as well and go back and forth. Community will say that the all these orphans or posit the notion or the possibility that these orphans are the numerous amount of them are indicative of what some say is a cataclysmic event that seemed to have happened, like a mud flood, like a quote unquote a physical minor reset, even though the tenets of it really haven't been totally described other than saying that a mud flood happened and it might have been a melted event. Okay. And I'm not saying this in humor. I'm being as professional as I possibly can. This is for people who are just coming into this niche and looking at it and seeing what's going on. Okay. Orphan-Trains are a main tenet in this community, and I want to give my overview, 100,000 foot view. So again, some say that these orphans are indicative of a reset, whether it's from the mud flood or whatever. I'm going to be giving these societal examples that may say otherwise, that it's just a unfortunate side effect of fallen civilization, if you will, to give you, I hate to keep on using this phrase, but 100,000 foot view of it all. So let's keep going. We're going to read this article now. And for those of y'all who want to look into it further, oh, not that one. Excuse me. We're going to listen to this guy, though, because this guy details the Great Reset and how the Industrial Revolution has been kind of tinkering out now and fading away, and it's been giving rise to this new information age. And he's trying to rally the troops and the oligarchs and everything and say we need to get this going. But I'm going to counter that professionally and say we need to get back to the agrarian way of things. And it's a shame that we've fallen so far away from it. So that's what we're going to be doing here. And again, it's this article that we're going to be reading from. I'm going to close this tab right now because this is the actual link itself. But again, it will be in the description. I do have screenshots, y'all. That's a pro tip right there. So again, and we're going to track back to this, and we're going to round it all off as to my take on the Orphan-Trains. Okay, this article is from the Ranker. Weird History. Pardon me, 1 second. Okay, sorry about that. So I'm going to read it and probably give context and narrate through it, if that makes any sense. But here we go. There were so many homeless orphans in the late 1800s, they were auctioned off to the highest bidder. From the 1850s to the 1920s, Orphan-Trains transported hundreds of thousands of children from the East Coast to the Midwest. Children who were poor, abandoned, or runaways found themselves traveling across the country to start new lives. The origins of foster care can be tracked back to this unusual practice of shipping kids across the United States to families they'd never met. The foster care history timeline begins with Connecticut-born The foster care history timeline begins with Connecticut-born minister Charles Loring Brace. We heard about him in the other one, I believe, Infogalactic article. He was alarmed by those abuse and he was alarmed by the abuse and poverty he witnessed among the children of New York City while working as a missionary. New York City is a good example. That's why I'm glad I have that book right here sitting next to me. Some kids were housed in overcrowding orphanages, while others were trying to survive on the streets. Many of them were dirty, rambunctious members of street gangs and thieves. Makes you think of Gangs of New York, and that's going to come up later too. In reference, their parents were either dead, sick, addicted to drugs and alcohol, or unable to support them for whatever reason. Brace is an important figure in child welfare history in America. Because of him, more than 100,000 children were placed in homes over the course of 75 years, and it all started with Orphan-Trains. Also, again, I got to say, check out my video on Father Baker, because he was a major player in the orphans in Western New York as well. And I detail that in that episode. That'll be in the description below. Okay, why were there so many orphans? Over 4.3 million immigrants moved to the United States between 1841 and 1860. Now, again, that's why I have the Industrial Revolution up for quick reference. The Industrial Revolution, if you're listening, is from 1760 to 1840. So pretty much right after the Civil or the Revolutionary War, 1776, we gained our independence, obviously, right up until the mid-1800s, mid-19th century. For reference there, let's go back to reading. Okay, in 1860, there are about 4.3 million immigrants that moved to America. So think about that. They traveled to America to find a better life and escape their homelands, which were often plagued with political unrest, poverty, and overwhelming problems. It's pretty general. Some of these immigrants found themselves in overcrowded cities where getting a job was very difficult, if not downright impossible. Not the least of their issues, people had a hard time because they didn't have members from their extended family nearby to help them raise the children. Everyone pitched in and worked to earn money, including kids as young as 6 years old. So there you go. That's why I also have up the child labor excerpt really quick. So this is kind of the flow of what we're going to do. I'm going to be going back and forth. Hope you don't mind that, but it's kind of like the deal with my hitting record and going, hip fire as we go. So let's continue sleuthing. 6 years old working. Wow, crazy. Desperate men took dangerous jobs and were often killed in their line of work. Women and children were forced to do whatever they could to survive, but it was common for mothers to die at young age because they lived in filthy homes and contracted typhoid, the flu, or other diseases. Other parents abandoned their children because they had no money or became addicted to drugs and alcohol. As a result, many children wound up as orphans. Okay, there goes some examples here. Just societal woes. Let's keep it going. There were as many as 30,000 homeless children in New York City in 1850. The population of New York City in 1850 reached about 500,000 due to the influx of immigrants. Between 10,000 and 30,000 of these residents were homeless kids. So of the actual immigrants themselves, there were kids coming over who were already, like, would you say, grandfathered in, homeless orphans coming in to the country. Okay, their parents didn't have the means to support them, so they were often forced to strike out on their own. These children either tried to survive on the streets or they lived in orphanages. If the same percentage of homeless kids lived in New York City today, there would be at least 150,000 orphans without homes. Wow. There goes some context for you. Hey? The first orphan train. The Children's Mission to the Children of the Destitute launched the first orphan train in 1850. Let's repeat that. The Children's Mission to the Children of the Destitute launched the first orphan train in 1850. The Protestant charity corralled the kids by searching all over the city to locate them. They found them in railway stations, docks, on the streets, and in other areas of the city. The kids were known as gutter snipes, in quotes. 30 kids traveled from Boston to New Hampshire and Vermont to find homes. It's kind of a random stat there. 30 kids traveled from Boston to New Hampshire and Vermont to find. I feel like that should be like 30,000. But anyway, the photos are all public domain, and you can see them right underneath, which are pretty cool. Wow. So kids were auctioned off to farmers and craftsmen who needed them to work. I think of like builder buddies type of deal, like indentured servitude almost. Some of this wasn't bad. Some of it was good intentioned, of course. I'm not trying to give that notion of like it's all doom and gloom or whatever. Some people have, I believe, had really good intentions. Bears will know this of the, like I said, the builder buddies. Someone who doesn't have the means to provide housing for themselves but can offer work, it's effectively a barter. Okay, so and people's good and benevolent intentions were, I believe, at the heart of this movement. But like everything, and we're going to see things, there's always a rot again to a fallen society, and people always try to worm their way in or wedge their way in on a malevolent level. Okay, and that's going to start to come up, and we're going to address that. And it's, again, I'm just throwing out example after example of other explanations that would account for these orphans, as opposed to just saying, "Oh, there must have been a reset of a mudflood back in the early 1800s. Look at all these orphans." I beg to differ, and I'm showing examples why, giving context through text and extrapolation and deduction from the high ground, like I say, capital H, from the high ground. Okay, so kids were auctioned off to farmers. But again, think of the initial intention of why there were so many orphans, societal dregs and woes. I think of what comes to mind is Les Miserables, and the movie, not the musical, with Liam Neeson and Uma Thurman. That's a pretty good movie, actually. A good rendition of Victor Hugo's Les Mis. I would recommend watching that. And that's what comes to mind when I'm thinking of, even though that happened in France, it's still very similar because it's incorporated within the time of Industrial Revolution. So here we go. Children's Aid launched its first orphan train in October. Children's Aid launched its first orphan train in October of 1854. The train, traveling from New York City to Dowagiac, Michigan, carried 45 homeless children. When they arrived at their destination, local farmers and craftsmen bid on the kids in an auction. So that does seem extremely dark and morbid, but how else would you deal with it if you were literally trying to take care of this issue in a benevolent way? How else would you do it? I don't know. I'm not saying I'm right, they're wrong or whatever. I'm just thinking out loud as I'm reading this. Families took the children home. They were worked in fields and in other capacities. A total of approximately 250,000 poor and abandoned children were relocated from the East Coast to the Midwest between the 1850s and the 1920s. All right. Some orphans were thieves and drunks. This is where the whole notion of the gangs of New York come to mind when I was reading over this earlier, getting ready. Immediately with that picture comes to mind like Bill the Butcher and the Bowery Boys, right? And the 40 Thieves and the Dead Rabbits. They're mentioned in this book, the Gotham book. I'll do another episode on that down the road, y'all. Okay, some orphans were thieves and drunks. Wow. A man named Joseph Barry was tasked with finding children to put on an orphan train. He found kids who were gambling and, even worse, intoxicated. He came across children as young as 8 years old that were drunk. The kids would steal items and trade them with rum sellers in exchange for liquor. Children who should have been in school were instead thieves and alcoholics. So that's pretty heavy. So you understand the gravitas here. Now, again, like I said, these benevolent institutions who try to help the issue, the societal woe of these orphans, unfortunately, it allows for people who are predatory in nature to have a field day with this. And like I said, we're going to get into that. Orphanages were overcrowded and kids were kicked out at age 14. Between 1820 and 1900, the population in the United States skyrocketed from 9.6 million. Where's RV Truth? Shout out RV Truth. I always bust his chops when I see numbers that are similar to what numerology. So I'm not saying that in a negative light. RV Truth dropped some serious gravy season with logos. Though I don't agree with everything, I definitely eat meat. Okay, let's start over. Between 1820 and 1900, the population in the United States skyrocketed from 9.6 million to 76.1 million. Now, just off the bat, obviously that's going to produce a lot of, considering the situation of what it just described previously about men going out to work and women being home alone, that would create a lot of orphans just by simple deduction of the progression of thought. Much of the increase was due to immigrants from Ireland, England, and Germany. The few orphanages that exist were extremely overcrowded, which is probably why kids were released at the age of 14. These young adults were expected to support themselves with no help from the community. Now, I know this off the top of my head just from watching nature shows back in the day, whether Discovery, History Channel, or Wild Discovery, or Animal Planet. Those would be termed as like especially the males. To give a bear reference, they'd be termed subadult males. And in the bear kingdom, when the cub first goes away from their mother and they're male and they're the subadult male around that age, respectively, they're the most dangerous. They're the most they don't have their wisdom yet, if you will, and they're more likely to come up and approach maybe a hunter or anything. So take that in context of and yeah, I'm sort of comparing these young kids to bears in the wild because it's an apt comparison. So young subadult males, very dangerous in the bear world, and I could see that. Just again, look at Gangs of New York. Young subadult males. Okay. And another point I want to underline is with this alternative history look at what the orphans come from, being the indicative of a reset. Well, we'll get into that later. I don't want to get off track. I got to read through these. Pardon me and excuse me for getting off tangent, but I think I've been doing a good job so far. All right, orphanages were provided with little food and education and were bad for children's development. By the early 20th century, these orphanages were receiving heavy criticism from the American people who learned that children's development was adversely affected by institutions. A UNICEF report titled Caring for Orphaned, Abandoned, and Maltreated Children, in quotes, noted that all kids, but particularly infants, lacked eye contact, physical contact, and stimulation to promote proper physical, social, or cognitive development. That was in quotes. Orphanages were replaced by foster care agencies in the during the 1920s. Okay, so orphanages became effectively foster care. Single working mothers were often forced to use baby farms, which sold newborns or waited for them to die. Most orphanages did not accept infants or young children. Larger cities had foundling hospitals, such as New York Foundling, which opened in 1869 to save babies who were abandoned on the city streets. And this stuff was happening, guys. Again, civilization just starting off. Cities just starting. Man, I'll tell you, watch Gangs of New York. Excuse me one sec. All right, thank you. Most orphanages did not accept infants or younger children. Larger cities had foundling hospitals. Oh, I read that already. If babies were abandoned in the streets, like I watched Gangs of New York, I don't think it gets that graphic as far as showing that example, but you can see it certainly giving rise to the possibility that that happens a lot in that time period. Single working mothers were often forced to turn to baby farms to care for their newborns. Newborns dropped off at infant institutions often died because they often arrived in poor health with diseases such as scarlet fever, diphtheria, and whooping cough. Foster moms would nurse the infants and either wait for them to die or they would sell them. Okay, there you go. That's where the malevolent nature comes in and people just seeing the opportunity to make a buck. And unfortunately, the nature of this is extremely dark because it has to do with children. So again, I'm sorry. It's very hard for me to go through this as a father, obviously of faith, as a follower of Christ. So I do think this is very important to share. So again, I appreciate you sticking with me. You're watching Bushwhacking History in Buffalo. Okay. Almshouses. Almshouses turned children into indentured servants. As the number of immigrants in America continued to grow, cities had increasing difficulty supporting their populations. Almshouses helped to provide food and shelter to the less fortunate. However, they struggled to meet the needs of an indigent population and were often mismanaged and corrupt. Philadelphia almshouses decided to bond out children as a way of making money. See? Kids and young adults became indentured servants who were supposed to be taught skills and given some education in exchange for their hard labor. Unfortunately, many abused the system. Some kids were taken from their families without their parents' permission. Children were often placed in areas far away from their families, so it would be difficult for them to run away, and so parents would not know if their kids were mistreated. Now, we're going to layer that with, right now we're going to real quick read the actual synopsis of the book that my mom's currently reading, The Baby Thief, because it definitely plays a role, or it definitely is relevant from what you just heard. Some people took advantage of it. So let's read this. The story, first told by Barbara Raymond in a magazine article that inspired a 60 Minutes feature. Okay, again, this will be in the link. I don't think this is the 60 Minutes feature, but this is the Jerry Skinner documentary that deals with the same subject matter, what this book is written about. Okay, crazy, interesting, extremely dark. Dark. Okay, so heads up, y'all. The 60 Minutes feature, it was shocking, right, to say the least. Georgia Tan, nationally lauded for arranging adoptions out of her children's home in Memphis, Tennessee, was actually a baby seller who terrorized poor, often unwed mothers by stealing their children and selling them to wealthy clients like actors Joan Crawford and Dick Powell. So, this gravitas, right? Yeah, we're underlining it right now. Parents would keep toddlers indoors, and the mother superior of the local orphanage hid babies in attics, but protected by political boss Ed Crump, Tan sold over 5,000 children and did much worse. So many died through neglect that Memphis's infant mortality rate soared to the highest in the country. Tan abused some of her charges and placed others with pedophiles. During her 26 years of operation, from 1924 to 1950, Tan also virtually invented modern American adoption, popularizing it, commercializing it, and corrupting it with secrecy. See, there you go. That's the rot. That's that inherent rot of a fallen man, woman, and fallen society, civilization. Okay? It will always have that rot that will fester. And unfortunately, this is the worst that it gets, okay, because it involves children. Okay, to cover her crimes, Tan falsified adoptees' birth certificates, sealing their true ones and issuing new ones that portrayed adoptive parents as the birth parents. This practice, this practice was approved by legislators across the country who believed it would spare adoptees the onus of illegitimacy. Now, you start to smell or sense the, how should I say, like cronyism maybe, where there might be a blind eye being turned, not even a blind eye. Institutions are actually, not even governmental institutions are legitimizing the actual scaffolding that would allow stuff like this to happen. What's their motive behind that? Gee, I don't know. Political influence might be one of them. Okay, wow. An adoptive mother, and again, you know, also, excuse me, the macabre nature of the ultra elite, it has to do here, plays in here as well. Not going to get into that other than mentioning it here. So that's all I'll say about that. And again, the actual book itself cited that they had been sold to actors. So Hollywoodland, we'll leave that one for another day. Okay. So yeah, she was the actual practice was approved by legislators across the country. Wow. To make it be more legitimate looking, you know, in the public eye, I guess. You know, I didn't have a whole bunch of, oh, would you say, bastard children? Pardon my language. Okay, an adoptive mother and award-winning journalist who interviewed hundreds of Georgia Tan victims, Barbara Raymond has written a riveting account. So yeah, and my mom just happens to be reading that. So a lot of things kind of lined up here for me to pull the trigger on doing my bushwhacking Orphan-Trains and Orphans. Are all the orphans from the early 1900s, late 1800s, early 1900s indicative of a reset, like how some in the alternative history community like to put it? I don't believe so. And again, I'm just showing other societal examples that would account for them, giving context and my opinion. So we're going to close that, Mom. We're going to get a distillation from you when you're done with it. Love you. Check you later. So yeah, anybody who's interested in this type of stuff, I'd say check that book out. We're going to close this out and get back to the regularly scheduled ladling of piping hot gravy, even though it's quite morbid. Okay, so again, I appreciate y'all sticking with me. Unfortunately, as I just showed, many abused the system. Some kids were taken from their families without their permission and placed away, far away. So obviously it'd be hard to track them, right? Institutionalized. This is what you would say. Can I get away with saying it? Can I say it in Pig Latin? Ildrin che athicing te. Shout out to my grandma Jenny, who was in this house. Love you, Grandma Jenny. She spoke fluent Pig Latin. All right, we've heard about this guy already. Charles Loring Brace became the pioneer of the foster care system. So, like we just learned also that the orphanage system effectively became the foster care system. Charles Loring Brace was an ordained minister. He was disturbed by the number of children in New York City whose parents were criminals, alcoholics, and entirely unfit to raise their children. Now, let me take a step back and give some context here. Some might say this guy might have had bad intentions or whatever. I tend to see the good in people and glass half full, ladle half full. I do believe a lot of people's intentions literally were benevolent. I have a hard time when I see children that go without or whatever. I'm in not a big city, but a city nonetheless, and I bump up with it a little bit, and I'm extremely empathic, and that really tugs at you can feel it in your gut. Okay, so not everybody was a historical actor, if you will, actor-based reality, and everyone's a shill playing for the house. Some are, a lot are probably, and especially if you incorporate political intentions and political figureheads, but not all. We really have to be mindful of that and distinguishing. Is this guy, I'm just using him as an example. I don't know. I'm just putting my foot down here saying some people's intentions probably were very benevolent. And what happens to the system like I said, in general, because of the rap, it gets infiltrated and people use it for their own um, psychopathic needs and desires and wants, and unfortunately, so again, was everybody a figurehead like we say, like Tesla might not even have been real, or these actors, or Einstein and whatever? That's all conjecture, but always keep in mind that there are good people out there, and there are good intentions behind some of their ambitions, historically speaking. So here we go, back to the program. Many of these kids became orphans. So he was disturbed by seeing these kids and how bad their parents were, and how it resulted in a lot of orphans, effectively. Many of these kids became orphans and turned into what were known as street Arabs, who joined gangs and committed acts of violence. Some of these children would get arrested and be sent to jail, serve time with adults. Reverend Brace believed the solution was to place these children with Christian families. In 1854, he transported 46 boys from New York City to Michigan by train, accompanied by an agent. Upon arrival, the agent went to a local church and told the community members that the children needed good homes. See, I mean, that's wow. To look at it at face value and to believe it for what it was. That's beautiful. I mean, honest to goodness, those kids were destitute and were facing the worst possible life that you can have in a major metropolitan city. In the throes of industrial revolution, I mean, come on. At a certain level, this was a benevolent act. I think this is my opinion, of course, but all the kids were placed with families within a week, you know. And of course, you're always going to have exceptions, people taking advantage, and sometimes that's all you hear on the back end of it is like the bad things of it. And again, I know it's not all unicorns and butterflies. Goodness, I know that. I'm just, again, to underline, highlight, and italicize, there are other mechanisms, society-wise, that would account for the large number of orphans. Doesn't mean a reset. Okay. Majority of placements were successful. Between 1855 and 1875, about 3,000 children traveled on the orphan train each year. The kids spent days or even weeks to reach their destination. Some kids were excited about being placed with families, while others were upset because they still had parents or other relatives at home. There you go. Some, like, wasn't all unicorns and butterflies. I guess that's a good way to put it. Most children were placed with families during their trip. People would pick them out. People will put them out at one of the train stops. Families were vetted by local authorities, and Children's Aid would visit them each year to make sure they were doing well. The group removed kids from homes they deemed unfit. Children's Aid reported in 1910 that 87% of its placements were successful. Moving along. Some kids on the orphan train were more desirable than others. Most orphan trains traveled to the Midwest, which was largely inhabited by Western European immigrants, most of whom were white. Agencies wanted to make the best matches possible by the standards of the time, so the majority of children on the trains were also white. It was challenging to place non-English speaking children with those who knew their language. Some kids who spoke other languages rode the train several times before finding families who would take them. The agencies had little problems finding homes for infants, but it was challenging to locate foster families for those over 14 or those who were disabled or sick. Okay, that's where you come up with these infirmaries and boys' homes for that stuff. It wasn't unusual for siblings to be split up among families. Oh, that's tough. Many children who traveled west on the orphan train were accompanied by their siblings, but they weren't always fostered together. A man named Lee Nailing of Atlanta, Texas, recalled being separated from his two brothers. Fortunately, he was able to stay in contact with the siblings. Some orphans, including Nailing, were adopted by their families and treated like biological children. See? I mean, I would say most were. Children's Aid provided free school lunches, daycare centers, and more for those in need. Charles Loring Brace and others founded Children's Aid in 1853. Up until that point, kids were housed in orphanages or almshouses. The group provided shelter, fresh air programs, that's cool, and education to approximately 30,000 orphans living in New York City. Children's Aid was the first group to launch the first unofficial free school lunch program in America. Wow. In 1881, the organization helped working mothers by opening the first daycare for infants and children. And in 1906, they began providing free dental care. Nice. Were you guys doing that in England? Needed it. Okay, this is the last slide of that. That's a joke. Shout out to all my English brethren out there across the pond. Okay, last orphan train. The final orphan train left New York City for Sulphur Springs, Texas on May 31st, 1929, during the Great Depression. The economic depression, in conjunction with the Dust Bowl, there goes that dust again, devastated families in the Midwest who couldn't afford to feed themselves, much less take in orphans. In addition, the public's perception about orphans changed. Many believed it was better to keep families together. In addition, states began passing laws preventing the placement of children in other states. That's probably in part to curb a little bit of the I'll che affecting tray, if you know your Pig Latin. A. So that was that article, okay, and that will be in the description. So let's keep it going now. Again, I'm not doing anything else here but showing other societal examples of what might cause all these orphans. We got the definition of orphan hammered out, Orphan-Trains we looked at. This is an interesting list of orphans and foundlings, because what I wanted to do with this real quick before we go and read context of the Gotham book that I have, and then again we're going to track it to planned obsolescence. Well, that might be for another video episode. I might have done a bunch here, because selling scarcity and planned obsolescence doesn't necessarily directly relate to the orphans. I can weave the thread, but I might not need to. We're getting a little bit long in the tooth here. If anything, just check out those episodes. Bushwhacking, planned obsolescence, and the age of progress, as well as my bushwhacking buffalo number 18, the Basilica in Lackawanna, and Father Baker's Orphans. Highly recommend it. It's kind of a long one. Not really, actually, hour and 20 minutes. One of my more fun deep dives to do, especially since it's local, especially since it's about orphans and Father Baker. Also, an interesting anomaly that if you guys want to look into this a little bit further, which is where the feedback comes in, not necessarily the whole Tartaria thing, but from what I gather, they said they built this, Father Baker was responsible for building this building from scratch. However, in the course of doing my research on this episode, it looked like there was actually another building in its place, and they built the basilica around it. A building that was a red brick building. Now, I couldn't find any information about them demolishing a former red brick and then building the basilica. Something to look into, and I appreciate your feedback on it, because this is an ever a compiling or compendium of work that I'm doing here. So check that one out as well. And let's get right back into it. Bushwhacking, planned obsolescence, another good one of mine. If you didn't know what planned obsolescence was before watching this episode, you will after. That's 100. And what I'll say about this is pause it and read that. Scarcity is only an issue in scare cities. This firmament is indestructible, regenerative, and bountiful. You know how many pounds of tomatoes that you get off of one seed of a tomato? Look it up. All right, more examples in context of what's going on with these orphan trains. I knew I had, obviously, I know that I have this book, but I knew that there would be references to orphans in it. So just on a whim, when I was compiling my research for this episode, I'm like, let's open up the index here, and then here we go. Just gonna give some more um, examples as to why it was such an issue. Here we go. Let's see. Let's show the page 1160 and 1161. This is one of the best examples that I could find in this book, and we'll go through them all. And orphans were throughout history. This is a list. I brought this up earlier. Sorry, I'm going back and forth, but I wanted to show this to give context of there were orphans all throughout history, very big names that you'll recognize, from Moses to Amenhotep in Egypt. So there you go. This will be in the description as well. Sorry about that. All right, so we're at the Gotham book, and other examples of the dredges of society and fallen civilization. Literally, orphans are a side effect of it. And it also shows it in movies as well. I got a clip for you at the end. We'll end with from a Heath Ledger, rest in peace, movie that does a good job of exemplifying what I think is a mock of fallen civilization, and the fact that orphans are an unfortunate side effect of our civilization in major metropolitan cities, or what I would term Babylon, right? It's fair game to be mocked by the others, by the fallen, by those who placate to the evil, okay? And they do. And I'll show you an example of it, and I'll give context. I'll lure you in a little bit. It's the movie called The Order with Heath Ledger. I've used it before for the Dust episode. Check that out too. But all right, so let's get back to it, Dust. The biggest problem, however, lay in dealing with children of the poor and degraded. All right, so just to give a time reference, 1879, you kind of see where my cursor is. Here we go again with the gentleman Charles Loring Brace and his Children's Aid Society, CAS, had continued doing their best in this regard by the mid-1890s. So if nothing else, I'm just layering evidence here from other sources, from that article, from this book, that it was an issue, guys. It was a societal dreg. It was a societal problem that had to be dealt with institutionally at a government municipality level as well. By the mid-1890s, Brace had dispatched over 90,000 poor children to Protestant homes in the Midwest so American women would raise them in proper surroundings. CAS surveys reported these children were happily growing into independent adulthood, though in fact a disturbing number seemed to be wending their way back to New York and reestablishing relations with their families. I don't blame them. The Society of the Prevention of Cruelty to Children, SPCC, was empowered to take more definitive action than Brace's group could, a spinoff of Henry Berg's Old American Society for the Preventative Cruelty of Animals. Oh my word, that's kind of a mock. Okay, so speaking of mocks, I had to put that together earlier, but that's almost like a mock. I mean, I know I compared subadult male human males to bears earlier, but that was more, how you say, respectful, I guess, if you can say it like that. Anyway, so cruelty to animals have been established in 1874 by the ASPCA lawyer Elbridge Gerry, an all-male, all-elite, and overwhelmingly Protestant organization. It searched out children deemed neglected or abused. See, they had way more breadth back in the day to like literally grab people up. I know that it was a problem, and there were kids all over the place, and they didn't have parents to account for them. I mean, obviously they had municipality legal right to do this, but you can just see how there was so much gray area for people to take advantage. I mean, obviously, for sure. It searched out children deemed neglected or abused, prosecuted the parents, and turned the use over to an appropriate agency. After 1881, it was given actual law enforcement power. There you go. The problem lay in finding an appropriate agency in the old days, such youths would have been consigned to an institution like almshouses, we learned about them, or the house of refuge. But asylums had fallen out of favor. Rather than educating and redeeming their youthful charges, they were now believed to expose them to further degradation. Indeed, in 1875, the SCAA had one passage of the Children's Act removing all 2 to 16-year-olds from poorhouses. In large measure, well, this is crazy how much legislative work went on to deal with this. So it was definitely known, it was addressed. It wasn't even like it was I guess probably the open secret part of it was more taboo. But I guarantee people knew that the Che affixing tray angle was a major part in this. So again, it makes it lucrative. That's probably why the orphan issue continued going on as well, more than it had to. There was an issue. There were a lot of kids, but there were also there were forces, unfortunately, making money off of it. As again, another hallmark of fallen civilization, unfortunately, my word. In large measure, the law was aimed at parents who, after public outdoor relief was terminated, began entering poorhouses with their children, thus maintaining their negative influence. The new legislation required parents entering poorhouses to surrender their children, who would often be transferred to orphanages from which they could be passed to decent foster homes, right? Wow. So it looks like they were tightening the belt. You know, the parents couldn't come in anymore, just the kids, pinch off that parent connection, they say, because they were deeming the parents to be unfit. But that's a cascading issue in the revolving door of like almost like a recidivist thing where a repeat offender, how are they able to better themselves in these conditions? You know, that's my liberal side coming out, but again, let's stay on focus here. Unfortunately, for this schema, the male Irish Catholics who had just assumed control of Tammany Hall, there goes the Gangs of New York for sure reference. Bill the Butcher's connection at Tammany Hall was Boss Tweed. And he's got a great scene with him where he tells him to get the F out of here. Don't come down to the points anymore, or I'm going to dispatch you by my own hand. And he says, as for you, Mr. Tammany effing Hall. What a great scene. Shout out to actor, oh goodness, who plays Bill the Butcher. I can't believe I don't know off the top of my head right now. I'm drawing a blank. You gotta be kidding me. He's a great actor. Okay. So, unfortunately for this schema, male Irish Catholics who had just assumed control of Tammany Hall under honest John Kelly proved newly powerful enough to insist that the law required children be placed only in institutions controlled by persons of some religious faith. So there was a benevolent effort, if you will. Wow, that's going to kill me if I can't remember the name of the actor. Daniel Day-Lewis. Shout out to that actor. He's awesome. Okay, we've seen this one before. Again, shout out to Tartarian Truth. I'll name him. Yeah, New Amsterdam. Buffalo was also New Amsterdam before 1804. So what's going on here? We're going to look into that. Tartarian Truth and I. And I don't see any need to go over more of these examples, just showing that there were Roman Catholic organizations, asylums, charities that all were aimed at trying to help the issue of orphans. And I think I detailed a lot of examples as to why there were a lot of orphans, not just the Industrial Revolution, all the immigration, single mothers, fathers having to work, child labor. I don't, in my opinion, 100,000 foot view, I really don't think that it was from a some sort of cataclysmic reset in the early 1800s. I don't buy into that at all. And this was my deep dive sort of on orphans, on Orphan-Trains. I showed you the mainstream, showed you some books that I have. And like I said, I'll leave the link to this actually. If you want to come in and look and read this, I'll form a link of it. This is into my Google Photos, but you'll have access to just this as a view only, and you could zoom in and everything. So this will be of access to you as well, below in the description. Now, so I don't have anything much else to say. I'll put this link in the description as well. Extremely dark story of that lady, Miss Tan, who that book was about that my mother's reading. The Baby Thief. Crazy, crazy story. There was some lucrative means behind the orphans and foster care. And that might have been the reason why I kept going for so long as well after the Industrial Revolution, stuff like that. That's my opinion. Long and short, not indicative. The Orphan-Trains don't indicate a cataclysmic mudflood, realm-wide mudflood event in the early 1800s. I'll say it till I'm blue in the face. Don't care. It's my professional opinion, and I'm not right. You're not wrong. It's just me doing my research and sharing it with y'all. I feel compelled to share it. That said, that was an episode of Bushwhacking History in Buffalo with Berserker Bear. Come to my YouTube channel if you want to figure out or find out what I'm up to, what I'm doing in between episodes. A great place is to check out is if you see top right here, circling, what I'm up to in between episodes. That's my Instagram feed. Here it goes right here. Please follow me. I give opinions on things like Antiquitech. I show pop cultural takes, humor, and critical. I show things that I like, such as music, such as movies, such as what's going on with the realm, with the Terra, all that. So I also preview what I got coming up as far as videos and episodes. So again, if I don't have an episode or a video out for a minute on my YouTube channel, come check out my Instagram. You can definitely catch me over here. You can definitely DM me and share some ideas, give some feedback, and all that. Oh yeah, I also wanted to say on my YouTube channel, I do have monetization set up. And if you go to some of my videos, there are like a super thanks feature at the bottom of them that you can thank me right here. You can monetize. I'm going to be setting up a Patreon. Yes, I have to. I'm in the process of purchasing my home right now with my family. So that's my little plea for helping out donations. I'll have more venues for you to donate to the Berserker Bear Research Fund, whether it's going to be Patreon. I'll set up memberships on my channel as well. I'm going to hammer down and push through it and do it. So a good way for you to donate to me is a super thanks underneath the videos that are monetized. Keep an eye out for that. I really appreciate it. And again, in between episodes, check me out here, Instagram. I'm always posting stuff as to what's going on, my takes, and such like that. So again, that was another episode of Bushwhacking History in Buffalo with Berserker Bear. Until the next time, keep it sleuthin'. God bless.